Okay, looks like we have the numbers ticking down there. My name is Bruce, and tonight with me I have a friend from a few other networks I'm affiliated with, Arnman, and we were in a chat where we were discussing traps for tabletop RPGs.
Hmm.
And not to steal any of his thunder, there was an exchange going on that I felt was it could go the wrong way quick, and both men have interacted with each other a lot on a friendly nature before, but I wanted to have Arnman's thoughts because there was I need to get his input on things, and we're talking just now right before I hit record. He starts telling me why he was so excited about tonight's chat. So with no further ado, Mr. Arnman, how are you tonight?
Well, I'm good. I'm good. Like we said just prior to the recording, I've been playing since I played started in mid 1977, and we were playing OD&D, and then at that point in time, they introduced the thief, and so my interaction with traps back in the day was would find traps, and everybody would try to disarm the trap. But we didn't disarm it with a die roll as much as we explained how we were going to what the trap was and what we were going to use it for. But traps weren't everywhere, if that makes sense. They just weren't used all over the place. When the thief class was introduced, and I know the thief was around before then, but we didn't use those books until one of the guys got one to introduce the thief, and it just became a die roll. And it didn't just become a die roll with our group, but we were confused. Why would you roll this? And for a while we thought, okay, this is cool, you can roll it, but we did it in a way that you still would solve the trap. I don't, I don't hear you, Bruce. You're muted.
I'm sorry, I had to
Yeah.
close the door because I had some noise coming in that I don't want to hear.
Okay.
But we have this piece of scenery that in the other video I was rotating this around and saying, you see this pile of treasure chests, and
Sure.
allow the players to describe how they will approach it, what they're doing, and give them information on what they're seeing, but drip feed it to them. That way they can take measured steps, unless it's a timer situation. Then it's like, well, what are you going to do? And
Yeah.
figure out at what point does the trap go off.
Right.
But I want to have them interact with me as a DM to a player. Eager
Exactly.
in that.
I think when you introduce the thing that happened in the stream today, and the misunderstanding was, of course, I'm in chat. I get 200 letters and no tone of voice, no inflections, no explanation, and so that's no place to discuss something like that. But the point is, where why the idea was just roll and get on with it, and I didn't understand what is getting on with it. Where are you going that you can't interact with the trap, you can't role play the trap, you can't role play the situation? I mean, our the old school that we did, it was all about situations, because basically at that time we were dungeon delving, we weren't doing campaigns. I mean, we did that a couple years later. We did surface campaigns and the whole thing. I built worlds and all of that. And that was about 1979, though. At the time I was introduced to it, when you came out of the dungeon, you just went to town. So you were in the game and you were in the safe zone, that type of thing. There were no adventures in town. And so I don't understand why you wouldn't interact with the trap or the secret doors. You describe you they look for a secret door, and by the way, anybody can find a secret door, right? So
Mhm.
you describe. Now, as a dungeon master, if you just have secret doors everywhere, this is going to become tedious. If you have traps everywhere, it becomes tedious, but you should have a description of how to open that door. In the DMG, for instance, in 1E, it's one round to find the door, it's one turn to figure out how to open it. And if you just say, okay, you figure out how to open it. Yeah, you figure out. Just write off a turn and open the door. But I presented I'm playing a game for the first time. I'm DMing a 1E game, and I'm really having a hard time getting the players into the old way to say, you see a crack in the wall. What do you do? There's an outline of a secret door. What do you do? Well, there's a lot of things to do, and so I'm walking them through this. Look for ways to open it, oddities, things there, that type of thing. And so role play that as well, but traps especially. We did a plate. You have a pressure plate trap at a doorway. It's simple. He says, I'm going to search for traps. You find a pressure plate at the door. It's really simple. Just beyond the threshold, there's a flagstone that looks like it will depress. I disarm it. How are you going to disarm it? And it's like, I roll the dice. And I'm like, yeah, I know. We'll get to that. How do you think you can disarm it? Actually, what was funny was they came up with let's go through the thieves tool and find something thin and get it working in there where we can shove a iron spike in there and try to, brace it from closing. Okay, roll your skill. And he failed. It's a blind thing in the tabletop, but I didn't care because the roll was just to appease his need to roll that skill.
Yeah.
Because I already knew the trap was defeated. And actually, in hindsight, I probably just said, you don't need to roll. You defeated it. But then after they went through and came back, I said, why didn't you guys just step over it? So it gets bound into that die roll. You know what I'm saying? To the point where you're not role playing it.
They're playing the character sheet. They're
Yes.
not really playing the character.
Exactly. I've mentioned this to some other streamers about character sheet, and that to me is probably the single difference between OSR and modern games, is that in the OSR we didn't look at the character sheet because we had it on a little 4x6 index card.
Mhm.
There was nothing to see, as I had it memorized by the time I rolled it up. Basically, the only thing I looked for was, do I have that potion? Did I scratch it off? I mean, that was really about the only time you looked at the card. And all eyes were forward. All eyes were looking at the world. All eyes were experiencing the dungeon or whatever at that time. And it was a different thing. There's two other aspects of this that I go for in my game that's related to traps.
Mm-hmm.
And one is the term meta. Never was such a thing. Didn't care. I really encourage the group to discuss things and figure it out. That interaction between the players. What if we try this? What if we try it? To me, that's one of the beauties of the game.
Yes.
To say everybody has to be quiet except the guy who's right there doing it. It's like, oh, this is hampering. This is pitiful. That's just my take on it. On that. It's like, and so by the time we've done this now about 3 sessions, and the thief is still having a hard time with it. He just wants to roll, but the other guys are getting in on it. Well, what if I try this? When I try that? So, okay, I try that. So I'm not going to kick him out of the game or anything over this.
No.
He's got a different style, and I'll work on it. I think though, by the end of a year of this, because this campaign's a large, long campaign, I hope he'll be doing it. I had to step in and have an NPC push on the door. He just goes up and pushes on it. The secret door. It just opens. I mean, I'm working on it, but I really want that old school feel where you interact with things. Anyway,
You're good.
I got frustrated with that. Like, oh, jeez. I don't just kick.
I understand your point of frustration because there's a game that I follow quite a bit called Swords and Wizardry, and now I follow. The reason why I do that is that it's written by Frog God Games. They had it licensed from Matt Finch, and now they've split. Matt Finch still does Swords and Wizardry, but Frog God's pointed more towards OSE. The chairman, the guy, the showrunner for Frog God, wrote a book on how to do just dirty tricks, which really wakes up modern DMs, I'm going to say myself included, on how the old school mindset is. Because the way that the new game is, you read aloud text, you wait for players to roll their perception or whatever they're doing skill, and you let them know whatever they see or whatever they hear or whatever they sense or whatever they're doing. You respond to that, but then you basically mark off like, okay, well, they earn this much XP because they figured this out. We go to next part of situation and interpret something a little heavier. But I would much rather not have the die rolls be a thing. I don't want the rules to supersede that conversation, the back and forth.
The perception rules is something that we never had. And in old school, it was basically, if they look, they see it.
Yeah.
If it's hidden, if they look, you describe what they see. You don't have to say something's hidden, because if it's hidden, they don't see it. But if they look for it, they find it. It's really not about a die roll. It's really about actions and interactions. So
Yeah.
I had a person one time say, well, what I have a giant crab in a river, and if they try to swim across that river, how do they know if they see the crab or not? And I said, because he said they look in the river. Well, then they see the crab, unless the crab's hiding in something, and then they see what the crab's hiding under. So he looked down, and it was like, well, then they look down. You say you see to the bottom, but what you see is a bunch of debris and tree trunks and things like that. But you're not sure what might be in there or not. You don't know, but that's what you see. And so then they can decide on that. But die rolls aren't required. You just
No.
look. Here's one thing I really hate too is I go up to the door. I search for traps on the door. Okay. How are you going to do that? Just give me a brief description. Well, I do all the older thing. I'm going to tap, go around there. But those cases, not so much. But I hate the one where I check the room for traps. I'm like, well, do you walk into the room? Are you just going to stand at the threshold and look? Because there's so many different aspects of that. So the key to this though is you can't have a trap every other room and every other place, because that according to like the complaint tonight in the stream was it slows the games down. Well, it shouldn't. It should be the game.
Yeah.
And so it should be just a few traps that matter, and traps that are interesting, and traps that are fun. And that's what we did. Also, nothing was locked. A few things were locked, but nothing is locked. And then you introduce a thief, and now everything's locked. Everything's trapped. It's just crazy. I noticed it. The shocker came when I got back into RPG through Baldur's Gate on the PC. Remember the first Baldur's Gate?
I do. I love that game.
I loved it too, and I was so thrilled. All right, I can do D&D again. And I'm like, why is everything locked? Well, if I didn't have a thief, it was just crazy. And then, of course, you just save and reload until you unlock it anyway.
Yeah, that's
so what's
all
the
that game is. There is no point to that game. Just follow the railroad tracks until you get to the end.
Yeah.
I mean, that's not a bad game, but for them to say this is an open world, no, it's not. It's not.
You could decide to go different places at different times.
Yeah.
I'll give it that. But
was there anything else you wanted to discuss, or because no offense, but you hit the meat of what's wrong with modern gaming.
Yeah, it is the difference. There's one more thing I'd like to discuss, and that's that, and it's related to the thief, and it's related to puzzles and things.
Please.
In my game, everybody can do everything a thief can do nearly, just not as well.
Okay.
So everybody can search for traps, because that was the old way, like in OD&D and the basic and everything. 1 in 6, you find it. A dwarf can bind it on 2 in 6 if it's the type of trap a dwarf would know, like stone and moving stone and sliding. And that's in the Dungeon Master Guide as well. Everybody can move quietly, but a thief can move silently. And the difference is, if you're moving quietly, the monster rolls to hear you.
Yeah, they had a hard time with that.
But the thief, if he's moving silently, the monster doesn't roll because there's no noise to hear. That's the thief's skill. But nobody's moving silently or quietly or sneaking. They wait for the thief, and then everybody tramps in like it's a parade. And I'm shocked. I was like, this really changed the dynamics. Everybody can look for secret doors. Everybody can climb walls. They can't climb a sheer wall. There has to be something to hang on to, So anyway, I would like to see some of that come back. It's going to come back in my game for sure.
Yeah. I like skill games with classes, but that's why I run Pathfinder. But the way I try to run it very old school-esque. Right. And my players hate it because I do things like you're not leveling up right now. You're still in the dungeon. You need to go rest.
Right.
You can get your hit points and your saving throws. That's all you get right now. That's all. Everything else you have to train for. What? Sorry. That's how the rules are.
Yeah. Well, at some point in time, have you ever played first edition AD&D?
Lots. It's a good game.
At some point in time, I'd like to discuss my trials and tribulations of trying to do rules as written. And that's what I'm doing right now. This is a crazy deep dive into trying to do rules as written all the way through this thing. And the group wants to do it too. So it's an interesting experiment. So
we'll cover this here over the next couple of weeks if that's okay
sure.
with you.
All right. Yeah, that's cool. I gotta go. I have a cat screaming, wanting in.
Arnman, I appreciate it. I'm myself. I have to get going as well, but yeah, I had a great time listening to you discuss, and it's a sigh of relief to hear a gamer say the thing that you want to hear about at a table. Yeah. So whenever this gets broadcast, I'm probably going to let it release tomorrow.
Okay.
But I need to record another video for Dungeon Delvers and get that out as well. So I have both these released on the same day, not the same time, but I really want to hear more of that mindset, because there's people that are out there. They start off in 5th edition or with Paizo's products, and they think that's how you play. But then they discover this wide world where, like, there's all these OSR clones of basic, first, or second. And they're like, what is this? And you kind of have to bring them back and say, like, get rid of that 4-page character sheet. Stop that. This is your index card. Notate your ability scores and what weapons you're using, and if you have any saving throws. And it's look at you like, what? And I ran a game like that. It was a 1st edition, O edition, like Swords and Wizardry. And I ran that at the game store up in Blanco Road. And it's basically like a 0 edition D&D game. Ran for 3 hours. The players loved it. Once they figured out they could do anything, they weren't limited by a character sheet.
Right.
It was like giving a kid the first test drive of a vehicle they like.
Yep.
And they went and bought like $250 worth of stuff for DCC, because that was the game they were looking at. And I'm like, I don't know DCC. I'm sure I could run it, but I've got this here, and it's a lot like it.
Right.
And so they sat with me for 3 hours, entertained me. I entertained them. They loved it. They had like 3 character deaths within 3 hours.
It happens.
It does. We had 8 people at the table. But I recommend for people watching this, try an OSR game. Try a game that is in the spirit and style of what has been done before. And I think you're going to find yourself really falling in love with the older style of play, just like what Arnman described.
And don't try to add the skills in. Try to work it where you don't need the skills. In other words, you don't roll against your intelligence. You don't roll against your strength. You don't, because that's trying to bring the new idea into the old game, and it's not the way it was. Don't put it behind die rolls if it doesn't.
I would instead of having skills or skill checks, could just have it to where you have a dialogue between the game master
Yeah.
and a player, or better, have the players experiment and you narrate how things are changing.
Yeah. And also, percentile dice or having a die roll is something, but it's a negotiated thing. And what happens is, what do you think this? What do you think my odds this will work? I go, oh, about 20%. Yeah, but want to do this, this, and this. Okay, 25. And now everybody agrees and they roll. That really is done all the time.
Mhm.
It wasn't about skills. It wasn't about your character sheet. It was about the dialogue with the world. What are my chances this will work? And then roll it.
Mm.
And so it is a different idea. It's a lot different. And you end up with some funny situations. That'll never work, that kind of thing. It's a really good time that way. But
thank you for honoring, or thank you for allowing me to honor your. I needed to hear what you had to say, and it's a God, I hate to sound religious on this, too religious. I am a Christian, but it's a blessing to hear somebody discuss something where they're like, I wanted to get this out. And when you've discussed it, you covered it within 14 minutes. And I was like, that you get a chance, get a channel. Do what DMJ does.
I might sometime. I've got my hands full of some other things, but I might do that sometime.
Okay.
But
we'll discuss things again here pretty shortly. We'll get a schedule set up, sir.
Okay. Thanks, Bruce.
Thank you. Sorry about that. Thank you, everybody, for joining us today. And this will be releasing within the next 24 hours. So I will post a item to YouTube, and you'll have the time for that. And I'll post it in Legion of Myth. Is that where you usually go?
Yeah, I'm in there. I'm in there sometimes. I'm in Aaron the Pedantic's channel mostly. I know he's not real active in it, but that's where I'm running my game, through his channel, just because that's where it started. And
I like Aaron. I know there's some things going on with him, but I still like him. I think he's a good guy. I just, there's a little bit of things that they'll navigate it.
He's never been anything but gracious to me.
Yeah.
And everything. So
I think you've been one of the voices that steered him in the right direction. And he's literally one of those people, like what I was talking about, where you have these guys play 5e and then they get the keys to the kingdom when they get a chance to play OSR, and they start trying to devour every game that comes out. He's got more games he'll never play through a campaign, through one of his games. He's going to be just like a kid, like, or the dog, Doug, squirrel.
I can tell you that I'd much rather play the adventure than the game system.
True.
And that's that the game system just happens to be the tool. And I don't need a whole lot of tools. If the tools work, and I just stick with it. A different genre. For instance, I'd never use first edition to play a Cthulhu style game. Never. Not in 100 years. But Cthulhu's old school. It was just a different way. We played Cthulhu way back. I remember same guys I played first edition with. Another guy was big time into Cthulhu. And so I played. And it's completely different. And that's cool.
I like Cthulhu quite a bit.
Yeah. But I am having a hard time with skills. I am really having a hard time with skills. And I really don't like the attribute, using an attribute roll, because nothing is attribute related. Intelligence is way overused, and so the magic user is the one who figures out how to build a cart. No, he wouldn't know the first thing about it. He's probably anyway. Well, that's another topic we could talk about.
We will cover this.
Yeah.
Thank you, sir.
Okay.